If it looks too wild on the axis, highlight, right click, boom, redact this. Redact this. Blood and face can't fact check the madness. Throwing out page from the bad habits.
1 second. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm getting started again. We got to do a quick restart.
Boom, redact this. I was young, I was dumb, I was scrolling. Type way too much, hit send, heart swollen. Now I keep receipts like a lawyer with a folder. But anything risky, get hit with the toner. Whole group chat, got tails, I ain't claim. If my name pop up, that's a typo, blame. Who's that in the pic, man, that ain't go strange. That's a random stranger with a very close face. On the stand of my friends, I plead don't recall. If they ask for the tape, it's a missing file. If they pull up the clip, that's deep fake style. If they show me the proof, I just smile. Like
we'll post on Substack later, guys, just because their interface is glitchy right now, and I don't want to keep our guests waiting because my head is on fire with what I've had to watch in the last hour with Pam Bondi. We'll get right up there. Give me 1 second. And what's happening? I'm going to jump straight to the hi chat room. Welcome, guys. Hi there. How are you doing? So much to cover this morning. I got all caught up in watching Pam Bondi turn the Congress into Jerry Springer, which I guess I gotta be honest, I think is her only option at this point. Okay, I'm just gonna bring him on, ladies and gentlemen. The masterful Glenn Kirschner joining us right now. Bless you for joining me this morning on what I would say is like redact this day. It's if we're gonna have a holiday around this or. Just like I'm overwhelmed watching. It was such trash what I was watching this morning with like Pam Bondi just attacking everybody who asked her a legitimate question with the Epstein victims behind her, and she is in violation of the law. And I think my favorite part is her going, Donald Trump signed this law. Well, he didn't even they needed to push him with this law. So the idea that he's living up to the letter of the law when he ran on doing this stuff without a law, it just shows I think we need more guardrails. What say you? Welcome and hello.
Hey, Hal, great to be with you. You know, they're only fooling the gullible, and I think even some of the gullible are like, wait a minute, this shit doesn't make sense.
Right.
So I would not watch anything this morning except Jamie Raskin's opening statement. And I think one of my favorite lines was that Donald Trump orders up prosecutions like pizza and you deliver every time. But here's the thing. You know, I won't listen to that yammerer, Jim Jordan. I won't, listen to the person who has destroyed the legitimacy of my former beloved home, the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi. I won't listen to anything they say. But, at some point, Hal, I have to believe the rule of law is going to come back into the light of day. Mm-hmm. And these people are all going to be wearing orange jumpsuits for what they're doing. As you started out, Pam Bondi is in violation of federal law every minute of every day. They have wrongfully disclosed the names of Epstein's victims, causing them to be scared to death. They continue to redact, hide, secrete the names of the rich and powerful and influential white men who were involved in this horrific criminal cabal. And don't tell me this is not going to catch up with them. It is our sworn mission to make sure it catches up with them because they're not going to be in power forever.
Agreed. I would like to point out, though, thanks to the work of Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey and others, that they named some people on the floor. There were 6 people that were redacted initially that should not have been, including a business partner of Steve Bannon's and an investor in Donald Trump, who's an Arab sheikh who runs a big company over in the Middle East. I guess under normal circumstances, the right would not consider that person an older white male in this particular instance. It's interesting that they're covering for this guy. If you just flash back to a time when the right wing couldn't line up fast enough to hate Muslims and hate anybody from the Middle East and wanted to bomb Iraq and turn it to glass. Remember that business? And yet now they're like, I don't know, anybody could make that same mistake for 25 years because let's address a couple of things. I'm sure you've seen the Nutlick testimony where he was asked by Van Hollen and others, like really just direct questions, and you could tell he was prepped to have to answer this. He knew he was not going to be able to Pam Bondi his way out of it because he went to the island. He brought his family and his nannies and another family and their kids and their nannies. The nanny who Epstein wanted to meet and another nanny, like he had multiple nannies, by the way, some of which may have been even arranged and through Epstein, like he was a pimp slash temp employer. They were neighbor, like he directly lied on Miranda Devine's podcast, and then was dragged out. And I feel like there will be no comeuppance for any of these guys until Democrats take the House and the Senate. Period. End of story. Like I feel like there's too much that these guys want to accomplish using Trump as a venue, as a tunnel to get this done. And so they don't care what he's done. They really don't. And some of them even admire him for it.
And did you see the way Lutnick feigned sincerity when he said, I was so disgusted. I saw a massage table at Epstein and I ran in the opposite direction, never to see him again. Well, I did go to his island and take my whole family. That my mistake. I mean, the way these guys feign sincerity. I mean, listen, again, they're only fooling the gullible. There's a reason Donald Trump surrounds himself with these people. They are weak. They are liars. They are willing to do dear leaders' bidding, and they believe they're untouchable, but they won't be forever. But, another really important data point that proves to this old prosecutor's satisfaction that they're obviously covering up for co-conspirators. Email traffic tells us a lot. And when we saw there was email traffic between and among federal prosecutors at the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office in 2019 saying, okay, we've got 10 of Epstein's co-conspirators identified, and they were strategizing how they were going to step out to these people, how they were going to continue to investigate and hold these criminals accountable. And did we ever get any accountability for any of those 10 co-conspirators that prosecutors had identified? These weren't just allegations by victims who are susceptible to attack by the bad people who don't want to be held accountable. These are federal prosecutors and FBI agents strategizing about how to hold these 10 accountable. The next thing you know, nothing. Crickets. Right. And then Kash Patel and Pam Bondi in last July said, oh, nobody here to be investigated in the Epstein files. Again, how stupid do you think we are?
Right. Well, I feel like he's counting on maggots being stupid and being like an army no matter what. I feel like that he always thinks that he's just convinced that there's a sort of mix between evangelical and Jim Jones followers, like he's got a giant Manson family, and no matter what he says, they'll show up outside the courthouse with a crucifix or turned into a swastika and they're carved in their forehead. The reality, though, is that number is slipping, and his numbers are upside down. He was confronted with them during the Super Bowl thing, and his two questions that he waffles back and forth in his brain that is turning to cottage cheese on a dashboard is that he says, on the one hand, I don't believe the polls. And on the other hand, I can't believe what we're doing is unpopular. And the reality is that Obama and Biden both deported more violent criminals than Trump did. The number that they're touting for the last year is 88,000, criminal aliens removed from the country, which is the static number that has existed since post-Reagan amnesty, and they started dealing with undocumented immigrants engaged in criminal behavior in the United States. About 88 to 90,000 every year in cycle, and it's varying degrees of it. It's, visa overstays with a drunk driving all the way up to murder. What Trump wants you to believe is this is 88,000 murderers and all that. So he's getting the really bad, but he's not. But Obama and Biden managed to do this without North Korean military parades down the streets of, Minneapolis suburbs. They managed to do the job and stay within the law. They managed to do it without killing any American citizens. And that, in watching Pam Bondi push back against that by defending the stock market. She said it cracked 50 today, and therefore, you guys owe an apology and fealty to Donald John Trump. When in reality,
Hal, murder's good for the market. Murder's good for the market.
Right. That's what she's arguing. That ultimately, they have. Well, I mean, we'll see. Okay, have you been looking into the Epstein files like everybody else? Have you done your digging around and looking at it, or are you responding to kind of like? Because I always like to ask somebody who, when you come on the show, and I really respect your reporting and your point of view on this because of your history with the DOJ. What's an element of this that you don't think is getting enough attention? What's a part of this that just drives you mad, that you're like, why is this not one of the primary things? This is a weakness, a crack in the dam you could shove a crowbar into.
Yeah, so it really is the way Bondi, Patel, and Blanche are dealing with this horrific criminal conspiracy. The rape of girls, the sex trafficking of girls, reported to be 1,000 or more strong, because what their approach to it is, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, and investigate no evil.
Right.
What happened with the most recent Epstein files?
Which I would like to point out is evil, by the way. just
3 million.
That is evil.
3 million documents, 3 million
pages and
documents,
images.
Pages. What happened? Instantly, the UK launched criminal investigations of rich, powerful, influential people. Listen, we in the United States do not have an appetite to hold rich, powerful, influential, connected white men in particular accountable for their horrific crimes. But when you disclose evidence of suspected crime, like has been disclosed in the Epstein files 1,000 times over, the UK literally within 24 hours, Hal, got 2 search warrants for Lord or Oh Lord Peter Mandelson, and they executed those search warrants. What did they do? They opened a criminal investigation into the artist formerly known as Prince Andrew, because there was evidence of likely crime. That is the way a civilized country and a responsible law enforcement agency does business. Whereas we have had, and let's be clear, both the Trump administration and the Biden administration has had in its hot little hands evidence of criminality in the Epstein files, and neither one would do anything about it beyond, I guess, what they couldn't avoid doing, going after Maxwell and Epstein themselves. So, I like to juxtapose the way the UK is doing law enforcement, which is the way it should be done when evidence of suspected crime is revealed, and the way we're doing it. We are doing nothing. Trump is desperate we're just going to put this behind us. Yeah, well, Pam Bondi should have looked behind her at the victims who continue to be victimized by this Department of Justice. And what I hope they do, Hal, now that DOJ has unlawfully exposed more than 100 Epstein victims by publishing their identifying information, that gives the victims standing to sue the Department of Justice and get a special master appointed, because ultimately we have to wrestle out of the hands of the Department of Justice all of the Epstein files, get them in the hands of a special master, which is an extension of the judge, and then we will begin to see some transparency, because right now Pam Bondi is in it up to her neck in a cover-up of crime.
Yeah. So there's an incredible line of people that are around Donald Trump, that it's not just that he is covering up for rich buddies. His entire cabinet is and has been, even in the first term, infested with people with equal or deeper ties financially and at least longer in terms of time, like Bill Barr, with Jeffrey Epstein. And one, we RFK Jr. is saying I flew on his plane twice. Then there's pictures showing up of him hanging out at a dinner with him in 1988. They're both at the same table at a charity event. And let me tell you something. As a celebrity who's been to a bunch of like fundraisers and that kind of stuff, you will occasionally land at the table of somebody that bought the table, and what they bought was you get to sit with them, right? Is that they want you, they bring you effectively as their guest, and they sit at the table and you're speaking or whatever. So the front tables always have one of the celebrities speaking or something like that. That was not the case in these situations. They were the buy-ins on that table. When you sit at one of those things, everybody there is either the guest of the person who bought the table, meaning that they paid $1,000 for everybody to sit there to the charity or the event or whatever it is, or you bought your own way in and there were 6 people at this table and 4 at this one, and you knew who you were sitting with. You both bought into, I want to sit with this person at this table, and you get to know who's going to be sitting at this table, who's going to, if I buy this table, who am I going to be with? Because you're bringing thousands of dollars to this or prestige or whatever it is. So the idea that he didn't look over his shoulder and notice that Jeffrey Epstein was sitting at the table reeks of Jill Stein and Michael Flynn sitting with Vladimir Putin and going, well, that was just the chair order. We're playing musical chairs. It's insane. And in this current regime, RFK Jr. is probably the weakest link to Epstein. And still, he bragged about it on a podcast, how he was, I had him over to my house, and I've been over to his house, and we flew together, and our families traveled together, and I went dinosaur bone hunting, which sounds like code anyways. It sounds like old men sleeping with young women code. But he also had a picture taken with Scott Ritter, or whatever, the guy who, it was like in the IAEA, who's gone to Russia a bunch of times. Right as he was leaving in August 24, he had his passport seized by the FBI because he was going over there basically as a sex tourist and a propagandist for the Russian government. He and RFK Jr. are sitting there together, like, hey, like on Instagram, fearlessly. You've got Howard Nutley, obviously. You've got the head of the Navy that Trump put in, who was never in the Navy, never had anything to do with the Navy, but his entire house is like a perv walk of art. He's got a screen that just shows Playboy centerfolds, 50 years of Playboy centerfolds, just in his house. And it's, by the way, he has kids. His wife, his trophy wife lady, has kids from a former marriage who come there, I suppose. They have a mirrored floor in the living room so they can upskirt everybody who comes in. That guy is who Trump put in charge of the Navy. So the idea is that this is a circling of the wagons, it seems like, more so than an accident. Pam Bondi could have torn up that non-prosecution agreement while she was AG of Florida, I believe, or at least made a move to do it. And because it was her state, and these people were victimized in her state, and she did not. And she was the second choice after Matt Gaetz, who, of course, was trying to start his own Jeffrey Epstein empire with Joel Greenberg. They were literally like, hey, there's a market that needs to be filled. And they started up that exact thing. So it looks less like there's incompetence mixed with Trump just trying to direct people, is that they're all aware of their culpability. You don't have just Trump sitting in a room going, you guys are going to protect me. You have 6 people sitting in a room in the cabinet on their own going, all right, we're all protecting each other. You got my back, I got yours, because we're all equally culpable in it. The Lutnick stuff of him taking his whole family on a yacht to the island after lying about never seeing him and calling him gross, like over and over. Milady doth protest too much. The reality is again, I don't think anything's going to happen until Democrats have the reins of power. Period. End of story. Like
I agree. And one thing that Jamie Raskin said yesterday, apparently he had some sort of access to all of the Epstein files. I'm not clear if they were unredacted, if it was beyond the 3 million, if it was the other 3 million that Bondi is still hiding, secreting, concealing from the American people. But what he said was, I think he had a way to electronically search for Trump's name. And he said, these were the headlines, Trump's name appears more than 1 million times in the Epstein file. So I think, listen, I think Donald Trump has finally earned a title of royalty. I think we can fairly call him king of the Epstein files. And, again, if they think this is never going to come home to roost, they are sorely mistaken.
Yeah, agreed. By the way, for those that are just joining us, this is Glenn Kirschner. He's got Justice Matters as his podcast. Please check it out and listen to it on the regular. His YouTube channel is right here, Glenn Kirschner 2. Great stuff and a great breakdown of these things. The watching Pam Bondi kind of like, again, act like a Jerry Springer guest in front of the Congress is really her only recourse at this point, because she sits before the Congress in direct violation of a law that Donald Trump was forced to sign because it was passed at such a level. It was so bipartisan because, half wanting to see the stuff come out and half fear of not being seen not voting for it, that there was a veto override number of votes. If there had been 51, 52 senators and it had passed by a simple majority or something like that, I honestly think he would have vetoed it and just never televised it. And it would have been a news cycle story, but he would have never talked about it. Like, we're not talking about that anymore. It's a waste of time. But because the numbers were so high, because this is an issue that does move votes and it does move voters. It literally elected Marjorie Taylor Greene. If there was a single thing that got her elected, it was her QAnon-tied belief that there's a cabal of super rich pedophiles that run the world and control our government and drive our debt up. Then Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein's wingman for 25 years. Look, the idea that this asshole cut ties with him for being a creep, he actually is mad because he stole his sex slaves. He goes, he was staking people from the spa, and I don't care if they're spa or not spa. What he meant was he was hiring underage girls in his spa. They were there for him. Virginia Roberts Giuffre looked, when she was young, like Ivanka. That's his type, and he hired them to work in his personal spa, and Jeffrey was hiring them away. That's what he got mad about, that the girls were leaving, and that Epstein, I guess, joked with him about it. There is a group of these folks that are breaking away. There is 8 to 12% of MAGA that I'm seeing in the right-wing media that are really scared of this. They're nervous that they've backed the wrong pony. And some of them are trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube, but others are just being real quiet. And it's because of the seriousness of even the documents that they've had come out. Now, Pam Bondi's in violation of the law for releasing the victims' names, unredacted, for redacting the names of co-conspirators that are on a list of co-conspirators. There's literally an FBI list of potential co-conspirators, exactly what we were talking about. She's in violation of the time of the law, how much she's come out. And this idea that half of it has been released is absurd because, I made this point a bunch of times. There are 3 million pages / images that have been released. There are discs full of images, a myriad amount of images. We have no idea how many images are on one disc. But you could post one image from that disc and claim, a single number, but it's not half of the images on that disc by a long shot. The same thing is true of any document. You have somebody's tax filings, you put one page of that in there. You could put one page of 50 million documents in there, and end up like with a percentage that looks like, oh my God, look how transparent we're being. When they are hiding so much and they know it. This is not going to stop. This is like, everybody's going to see everything short of CSAM, short of any sexual assault images that came up. But they're also going to want to know that those images were reviewed by law enforcement, and that's, I think, where you're talking about, like a special master would be put in. They would have to review it with a team and see all of this stuff to make sure that they're not just labeling something CSAM, and it's like, well, it obviously is, but it includes Donald Trump, it includes Bill Clinton, it includes Jeffrey Epstein and Ehud Barak and the Sultan that Donald Trump has a golf course with.
Yeah, and the reality is we will never know if everything has been released.
Right.
For as long as Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche sit atop the Department of Justice. They are not doing the work of the American people as we are duty bound to do as federal prosecutors. They are representing the interests of their former client, and I would argue their current client, Donald Trump. So I don't care if they disclose 10 million documents and say you've got it all.
Right.
I wouldn't be persuaded that we've got it all. You need a special master. You need the court to intervene. You need a co-equal branch of government to intervene. I mean, this is like one example of it on arguably a smaller scale. When Bill Barr stepped to the cameras and lied about the Mueller report, we didn't know what was in the Mueller report, and we couldn't prove he was lying until what happened. Judge Reggie Walton, a lion in D.C. criminal justice circles, ordered an unredacted copy of the Mueller report be delivered to his chambers. He reviewed it and he issued a ruling. Bill Barr lied about the Mueller report. Bill Barr spun the Mueller report. What Bill Barr said to the American people, and these are quotes or damn near quotes, what Bill Barr said to the American people is contradicted by the Mueller report.
Right.
And it's not until we can get an honest broker of the facts and the law, like the vast majority of federal judges, with Aileen Cannon and a couple others accepted, that we are ever going to begin to have confidence in any claim that we've got it all.
Right. I agree. And I also, like, when it comes to the Mueller report, for example, Bill Barr not only lied about what was in it after the fact, he guided the execution of the investigation in such a way that they could not look into the financial background of Donald Trump as part of that result. Well, that takes away one of the primary motives for him to do Russia's bidding or to help them or have them help him, is that he was obviously on the hook through Deutsche Bank to these loans that Russia was basically backing. It's one of the reasons, obviously, anybody looking at it as a layperson, the reason that Deutsche Bank gave him loans he was not qualified to have was it wasn't their money. They didn't care. They got busted for money laundering multiple times and were fined billions of dollars in Europe and in the United States specifically for this reason, was that they were simply just making up loans for other people that they could give just through the bank, and then they would take a fee. They would take the interest rate on that loan as just a way of, like, as a pass-through. It's how, Trump and Epstein's big fallout came from this over this piece of property, the initial one. And I think he cleaned it up afterwards. I think they got back together afterwards because he dry snitched on him, and then he called him and let him know that the cops were coming. Clearly from what we've seen in this. And anybody who believes that 2020 report that the FBI was in their files during the time of Bill Barr and all this stuff, that said that they talked to Reiter, I think it was the guy who was in Florida, who's no longer with us, who said that Trump said, "Thank goodness you're going after this guy." Trump has never said "thank goodness" in his life. Like, it's just absurd. But because they couldn't look into the money, that eliminates motive. You can't create a criminal act unless you got means, motive, and opportunity and proof of the crime itself. You can have proof of the crime, but one of the hardest things to sell is, what's the motive? He erased the ability to... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, what's interesting is people may not know, but motive is not an element of a crime with the exception of hate crimes. So people desperately want evidence of motive, but listen, I spent my entire life trying criminal cases. I never left the courtroom, taking time out for meals, of course.
Sure.
And I would argue to every jury, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, it's really hard to prove why somebody committed a crime. That's motive. There is a reason that when the judge instructed you on the elements of the crime, there is no element of motive. We don't have to prove it, right? However, people want to know. But you know what? If I prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant walked up to a victim on a street corner, pulled out a gun, shot the victim dead with no known reason,
right,
it's still the crime of murder, even if we have no evidence of motive. But once you give them evidence of motive, Hal, it makes your task of proving the crime beyond a reasonable doubt so much easier, because it explains not only that the defendant committed the crime, but why the
Sure.
defendant committed the crime. So I agree with you.
And also the in the situation of a financial crime where you're a quid pro quo, which is effectively what we're proving, part of the motive not being able to look into the finances eliminates it showing what he got in exchange and why he got it, and the timing of when he got that money, which is a material fact that was eliminated as well. Like, talk to your point, eliminating the steps the person took to walk up to the person before they shot them, eliminating their presence at the scene. If they said you're not allowed to look at the geography of this crime, where the victim and the perpetrator were at the time, that's the effect of in a financial quid pro quo. That's the equivalent of saying I'm not going to allow you to point out where the victim was standing and where the perpetrator was standing at the time, the ground they were on. That's the financial background that they were not allowed to look into. This lays over into the Epstein stuff. And I am assuming right now that every redacted file is of Donald Trump until I'm proven otherwise. That every redacted line, if it's not Trump's name particularly, it is a direct business partner or co-conspirator or a fellow traveler of his own in this sex trafficking ring and in this intelligence and real estate leveraging scheme, which is a lot of this as well. Real estate, famously known for money laundering. Trump, Trump and Epstein fighting over a house they never intended to live in so that they each could sell it to the same Russian for way over market value so he could bulldoze the fucking thing. Like, that proves that they were jockeying for position in the same illegal market above and beyond the other skeevy stuff that they were engaged in. And it's interesting that right now, Trump's financial crimes while he's in office are almost paling in comparison, the stuff he did with Epstein pales in comparison to what he's doing right now. He's enriched himself by at least $1.2 billion in the last year directly from beyond even the plane and all that stuff. What looks like a $5 billion multi-country scheme for golf courses, which are basically cemeteries. It's like a section of the Vegas desert for the mob. Even in the Epstein files, there's a report that one of the victims said that Trump's bodyguard threatened that they would end up on the back nine with the other C words.
I would say there are things to investigate in the Epstein files. Call me crazy,
right?
But here's a little bit of good news. I know we talk about the darkness and the big orange dark cloud, but there are some silver linings. People have observed accurately that, the Epstein Files Transparency Act has no punishment, has no sanction attached to it. It's a toothless law. Basically, you are legally required to disclose the files and make only appropriate redactions. Right. And if you don't, you're in violation of federal law. And you know what's going to happen to you? Nothing. Because there's no punishment attached to a violation of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. People may not know this book, these big, ugly blue books of criminal law, the United States Code. We have tens of thousands of laws. There are lots of laws on the books that have no right if you violate them. So they're really just kind of suggestions because what you're going to do if I violate the law. Here's the good news. Okay. By intentionally and repeatedly and flagrantly violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act, you can't be punished for that violation. But you know what you can be punished for once the rule of law comes back into the light of day? Obstructing justice, conspiracy, and accessory after the fact, which is a crime that is punishable with a prison term. And accessory after the fact is if you simply do anything that has the effect of helping someone who's committed a crime avoid detection, apprehension, trial, or punishment, like Pam Bondi covering up the crimes of the 10 co-conspirators in the Epstein files, you have committed the crime of accessory after the fact. So it's going to be a bit of a criminal buffet once we, the law-abiding folk, come back into power and begin applying the law without fear or favor to everybody who is now violating the law and victimizing wide swaths of the American people. So everybody just needs to focus on that, needs to remain engaged in every way we can, not just to make sure the Dems take the House and hopefully the Senate in the midterms, but make sure the Dems take the White House during the next presidential election. Just stay engaged every day. And if you feel defeated and depressed and despondent, let that energize you to engage in new ways or to fight harder, because they want us disengaged, desperate. They want us defeated. If only to piss them off. I will not give them that satisfaction.
Right. Yeah. I would also add, if I may, witness tampering and witness intimidation to this fact, because the not redacting the names of the victims, it goes a long way towards scaring them into, submission or withdrawing their claims and the like. I mean,
and that's a version of obstructing justice when you intimidate and interfere with witnesses.
Yeah, and there's also, if I may, there is a crime for destroying, hiding, and refusing to give over information or like records that you are legally required to do. Like if I was running a department and I was called before an appropriations committee and I refused to show the budgetary outlays, I was probably, let's say I'm engaged on my own in buying and selling stuff, and I was basically skimming from the defense budget or something like that, and I refused to give the documents about payments that led to me. Not only am I engaged, that is what I'm doing a crime, but not giving those records over to Congress and to an investigation specifically, hiding those, destroying evidence.
That's obstructing a congressional inquiry for sure.
Yeah.
And there's also the wrongful destruction and withholding of government records. And, like I say, there really is a buffet of potential crimes. And that is the buffet that we are going to feast on when these mofos lose power.
Oh, my God. And Pam Bondi, right now, as you and I speak, is sitting in Congress in front of her appropriations committee, committing every one of those crimes. She is literally, she's violating the law in not disclosing these things. She is protecting the people that is within them. Every single co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein's that she has sought multiple times to protect, and that members of the House have to go in there. If the law is very clear that you have to release everybody's name except victims, and or unless there's an ongoing investigation. Well, as of July of last year, there is no ongoing investigation of anybody. That's what they were. That unsigned memo that was really just a web page. Let's be honest. That was not a DOJ. That was a PR release. It might as well have been an Instagram selfie for all of its.
And I don't know who wrote it, but I went back and reread it a couple of times. And when Kash Patel starts saying, "We checked in every desk drawer, we checked in every broom closet, we checked on planes and trains, we looked here, we looked there, we looked everywhere." It was like a bad Dr. Seuss memo.
And we now know, of course, I think this is let me see if I can find this. Systematic review. This is that piece of paper. This systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. There's literally an FBI client list. There literally is. And there's emails and details as to why the FBI at that time drew the conclusion that these guys were engaged in this stuff specifically. There's this guy, and here's thousands of his emails with Jeffrey Epstein that we got from Epstein's laptop and all kinds of other stuff. And there's evidence for each one of these guys. And then he says, there was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals as part of his actions. There's tons of stuff about him telling his security guard to buy motion sensing cameras and the ones that were placed in the bedrooms. There are specific images that he checked off on as a good angle of the guest bedroom, like at his places. That in and of itself would be enough for at the very least a search warrant for whatever videos might have been kept or stored anywhere on Earth from those video cameras. Am I right? I would think.
You could take 1,000 FBI agents and spend the next 5 years investigating what's in the Epstein files
Mhm.
and actually hold really bad people accountable. But Hal, I have been saying it for as long as I've been running my mouth after I retired from the Department of Justice. This country doesn't have an appetite to hold the ruling class criminals accountable.
See, I'll push back on that in one area. I don't know that we did. But increasingly, the reason we don't have an appetite is because of Republicans. The reason we don't have is because these are people who are doing business and they live wild and high on the horse, and you guys are just jealous. That's effectively one of the reasons why. And if we go after these guys, we'll fuck up our economy because these are the captains of industry. And if we go after them, we're going to collapse Ford Motor Company or something like that, the big three or some shit like that. And it's a very 50s and 60s kind of attitude that Republicans had about business people and people of means, that they live differently and they live high that you just wouldn't understand. Right. And that's why they don't want to go after them. Also, some of them repented and found Christ, like a guy in prison who murdered, everybody because they were home. The part I think Democrats do at this point, and it's certainly across the board.
Maybe at this point, I would feel differently if the Biden administration had gone after for starters, the 10 identified co-conspirators in the DOJ email traffic dating back to 2019. I would be more convinced if Merrick Garland had held any of the motherfuckers accountable for organizing, orchestrating, funding, and launching the attack on the Capitol to kill American democracy. If we had put any of them behind bars for what they did, then I might revisit my opinion that this government, high government officials on both sides, don't have an appetite to get after the ruling class criminals.
And that's where I think you're right. I think high government officials of this, because there's this mix of the I don't know, default to normalcy that we've got, like, okay, let's because comedy is
put it behind us.
Yeah, comedy is so necessary to the function of democracy, and democracy is not about fighting; it's about stopping the fighting that happened all throughout human history and settling down and trying to find a bipartisan way, or a difference of opinion results in a solution. And so there's a lot of people who, when they get, when you're in office, that you spend every day trying to do that in theory if you're not covering up your own shit. But in this particular instance, these are sentences that set on fire a huge section of MAGA, as much as Trump is trying to avoid it. It was basically all the Democrats, and I think you and I shared during Merrick Garland the frustration that he wouldn't. I think there was a huge appetite for it, and everybody was like, slow walking this. But Biden and the administration was specific to, like, we're not going to direct them to go after, because technically that's our political enemy, even though they're criminals in this regard. So if he finds something, he can go do it. But we all found him, very namby-pamby. He might have been a great Supreme Court justice, but a terrible attorney general. And I do believe that you would be a great one, because there is an element of attack dog that has to go there, but based on the law and not, like I said, a Jerry Springer guest, which is what Pam Bondi is doing right now. But this sentence alone, we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. Okay, that is besides the Epstein, we found it was suicide, blah, 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 that the sort of the internet world caught on fire. That is the sentence that drove a wedge between Donald Trump and a big section of MAGA that is not coming back. I have watched over and over, and it has created this subgroup of, Ian Carroll and Candace Owens and all these folks that are fighting their own internal maggot war amongst conservatives and the like, to somehow hold on, along with their own bigoted attitudes, there's some semblance of conservative Republican, rule of law stuff that they bought into, I guess. But that sentence alone, just by the stuff we've seen before the 3 million that came out, is horseshit. It is just blatantly.
And career law enforcement people, myself included, and I'm sure I did videos about this the very day that memo was released. It's like we looked at that and it was so laughably transparent that all that was designed to do was protect Donald Trump.
Right.
And, whether intentionally or just as a byproduct, it protected all the other ruling class criminals who were involved in this horrific conspiracy, this cabal. And let me just say, when I say we don't have an appetite to hold the ruling class criminals accountable, I ain't talking about you and me. I ain't talking about the American people, because you're damn right we do. It is the political leadership that doesn't have that appetite to hold these folk accountable.
Agreed. And I will say that I'm a big fan of comedy. I'm a big fan of getting on with the actually solving the American people's issues. And if your goal is to guarantee that we don't have an economic crash or that people, don't lose their health insurance and all that kind of stuff, you're going to prioritize that over other stuff.
Yes.
If you've got a distinct opposition that thinks that your supporters are going to back down in the next election and they don't have to listen to you. So you're going to be.
But comedy absent accountability is destined to fail,
Agreed.
right? We saw that. We saw that dating back to Watergate. I mean, the minute Gerald Ford said Donald Trump, see, that's the Freudian slip. Richard Nixon, has suffered enough. We need to put our long national nightmare behind us. And I am pardoning him for his crimes. You know what? Pardoning somebody for their crimes is the opposite of accountability. And you can draw a straight line from that pardon to what Donald Trump has done and gotten away with. I never once, Hal, in my 30 years, sat down with a victim of crime. And I sat down with more than I could ever count and said, you know the way we're going to heal? You know the way we're going to move through this? We're gonna put your personal nightmare behind you by refusing to hold your attacker accountable
Right.
for what he did to you. That, all the comedy in the world, is not going to mean shit without accountability.
Agreed. I completely agree. But the levers have to be there for us. We have to have right now we don't have the numbers. We impeached him twice and the Senate kept him in office because we didn't have the numbers. Period. End of story. In this particular instance, what they have, the sort of, I guess this is one of those areas where like ego is going to actually be our savior, where, everybody, a lot of maggots thought, like when we talked about this yesterday with Adam James, who is, he and I have been talking about Trump's brain failing, and it clearly is. Like he's on a bad glide slope into awful that very well may end in his demise before the midterms come. And what you will see is Republicans going, if you elect Democrats, they're going to erase Donald Trump's entire legacy. So you maggots better show up and make sure J.D. Vance has all the tools he needs to make sure that America first survives. I guarantee they're writing the ads already. But there is a big chunk of these folks that aren't buying it. And one of the things, and I love talking to you about evidence, because that's ultimately where I feel like we can always, it forces them to defend the indefensible. One of the other things that was in this memo was that they reviewed the video about Epstein dying by suicide. And it said, during the review, the FBI enhanced the relevant footage, which is, boy, is that a red flag. Relevant footage. And then 5 minutes. Okay. I've got to head out. We have a doctor's appointment we have to go to, which is rather important, Glenn. But I'll say this. During this review, the FBI enhanced the relevant footage by increasing its contrast, balance, the color, improving the sharpness for greater clarity and viewability. That's right out of Kash Patel's mouth. And it wasn't true. They cut 8 minutes out of the video. Glenn, I want to thank you for being on with me this morning. I'd love to have you back. I got to run out the door. Appreciate you so much. I want to remind everybody to go to Justice Matters at glennkirschner.com. That will take you to all the relevant links for all of his channels and his podcasts.
And come on over to Substack. We do a community meeting on Substack, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time every night. It's a great group. It's a bunch of democracy warriors. And Hal, it's great to be on with you, and I appreciate what you do. Keep punching, my friend. Keep punching.
Absolutely. Not going to stop ever. Thank you so much, Glenn, and I appreciate you guys. I will see you later. Have a great day. Take care of yourselves and take care of somebody else, and I will see you guys this afternoon. There we go. And then, hold on one second. Thank you so much, Glenn. I greatly appreciate it.
All right, Hal. Good seeing you, man.
Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye.
If they ask, I forgot it. You ain't seen nothing. Yeah. We ain't saying nothing. Black bar from my past, can't track this. Screenshot.